other extremes. At the summit lies the Mount Washington State Park, where you'll see the home of the
Do you want me to stop this? We're not even up there yet.
No, stay.
Mountain Observatory,
You
and
listen
the
to it on
historic
your way
Summit
out.
Stage Office, the building where a world record wind speed was recorded in 1934. More about that later. This audio tour will be your information and entertainment guide as you travel on the oldest man-made attraction in the United States. Your driving time to the top will be approximately 25 minutes. And this tour will be your guide to the remarkable views and amazing
Hold it
things that
steady.
have happened here since the road opened to the public in 1861. Now, before we get to all the storytelling on how this legendary road came to be, and some of the extraordinary things folks have done on it, we have some pretty important information to pass along. Among the many wonders of Mount Washington, you'll be entering the fragile alpine zone, home to numerous rare and unique forms of plants and flowers. There will be many opportunities to stop your car and walk around, so please take care to leave these special environments as you found them. It's only because others have been thoughtful in past generations that these small endangered treasures are still here for us to enjoy. If you watch your step, literally, future generations will have the same opportunity. Please only walk on the gravel trails and not on any vegetation. It's only through our continued stewardship that we can protect and preserve these treasured resources. Just imagine that this road opened to the public in 1861, and the scenes which are about to unfold before you have remained unchanged since then. Also unchanged is the need for safe driving. The road's remarkable safety record over the past century and a half is because drivers, whether in horse-drawn vehicles of the old days or the motor vehicles of this century, respect the basic rules of safety, which apply both to the trip up and down Mount Washington. As you ascend the mountain and then descend after your visit to the summit, these driving tips will help maximize safety and minimize inconvenience. Please keep the following in mind as your journey continues. The Mount Washington Auto Road has two-way traffic coming and going at all times, and cars coming down should yield the right-of-way to cars going up. Keep to your side of the road. And don't worry, it's wide enough for two cars to pass anywhere along the road. We urge you to drive up in the normal gear you would use on the highway, usually drive, or D, which will allow your transmission to normally shift as it needs to according to the grade of the road. Shift to a lower gear if your engine seems to be sluggish. Also refer to the driving suggestions you were given at the toll house. Be sure to use the lowest gear available in order for your transmission to help brake the car and help avoid overheating your brakes. If ever there was a road that was designed for low gear, this is it. Also, avoid using your air conditioner, as this may cause the engine to overwork. There will be plenty of cool mountain air to refresh you as you continue to gain elevation. If your vehicle does begin to run hot, turn on the heater. It may sound strange, but this will actually help cool the engine. Should you find yourself driving in the fog at any time while on the mountain, turn on your headlights for the sake of all oncoming traffic. And please remember, it's a New Hampshire state law that all persons under 18 years of age must wear a seatbelt. Mark Twain once said, "If you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a minute." Well, he must have been thinking of Mount Washington when he made this famous statement, because things can change quickly and dramatically around here. Depending on the road and weather conditions, you should maintain a speed of approximately 15 to 20 miles per hour. However, your actual speed will depend on the current traffic flow and the prevailing weather. If it seems like you're holding up cars behind you, please be considerate of others, and stop at one of the many pull-off areas to allow them to pass. If for any reason you need assistance while on the road, flag down one of our white and green road crew pickup trucks or guided tour vans. Our drivers will be happy to help you in any way. Now, let's get to some storytelling about this amazing place. The creation of our Road to the Sky all began back in 1853, when the New Hampshire legislature granted a charter to General David O. Macomber to build an 8-mile road to the summit. It was a challenging task he set for himself, to say the least, but he had a vision of how tourism would affect the area in the years to come. The White Mountains were beginning to gain a reputation as a vacation destination, with grand hotels being built to cater to wealthy travelers during the summer season. His path to the summit of Mount Washington would surely be the high point of any visit to the North Country. In fact, your presence here today confirms just how right he was. One of the first grand hotels was the iconic Glen House, which was located at the base area from which you began your climb. This hotel, along with 3 others which shared its name, all burned to the ground between 1884 and 1967. For many decades to follow, there was no lodging on the property, but after many years of planning, the latest Glen House opened for business in 2018. Like its predecessors, the new hotel caters to travelers looking for the ultimate White Mountain experience. Unlike the previous structures, however, the new Glen House represents the pinnacle of green building practices and eco-friendly accommodations. Feel free to stop in for a tour or a great meal when you get back to the base area. As you drive upward through the hardwood forest, try to imagine what the early road builders faced. Dense trees and underbrush, steep ridges, and immense boulders and ledges oppose the construction at every turn. This isn't a particularly inviting place to excavate a roadway, but no adversity would be too great if it resulted in the conquest of this famed peak. One young woman who visited the Glen House in 1854, Mary Langdon, explored the work in progress and wrote an article for Harper's Weekly magazine. In it, she recounted her memories of the road during its construction.
We have all been walking in the lowering twilight on the road, which is making its way up Mount Washington. Though nothing is impossible to modern science, it would seem impossible to vanquish the obstacles to the enterprise. The inevitable steepness of the ascent, the rocky precipices. We passed on through debris of blasted rocks, stumps of uprooted trees, and heaps of stones until we got far enough into the mountain to feel its stern solitude.
And when that was written in 1854, they were still 7
only
years
2 miles
from
up
completion.
yet. We got 6 to go.
Unfortunately for General Maycomber, his financial backing ran out about halfway up the mountain. So, it ended up taking 2 companies years of back-breaking hand labor, blasting, logging, clearing, and grading to complete the task. During a 2-year delay after the first company failed, it was questionable as to whether or not the project would ever be completed. But the lure of Mount Washington was too great to keep this road from reaching the top. It was particularly difficult to make any progress when natural obstacles such as the weather combined with the primitive technology of the era to slow things down. Since dynamite had not yet been invented, all the blasting was done with black powder, a dangerous and at times unstable explosive. In order to split the massive rock ledges which blocked the way,
Yeah, of course it
individual
was.
holes were hand-drilled into solid
So was
rock
dynamite.
and then filled with black powder, blown up or split apart one at a time. All the logging was done with axes, saws, and elbow grease. Teams of oxen and workhorses drew carts filled with gravel. All in all, it was a
Your
dirty,
ears pop?
dangerous job,
Huh?
largely
Have your
accomplished
ears
by
popped?
immigrant labor working in a place not yet
yes,
fit
yes.
for man or beast.
Oh
But
my
finally, on
God.
August 8,
Mine just did.
1861, the
Mine just did
construction
as
was
well.
done, and done right.
What
Many
the-
decades later, in a study completed with aerial
Temperature's
surveys
dropping.
and the latest technology, the
My
Army Corps of
body's
Engineers
popping.
could find no improvement
Your
to the
body?
route as laid out in the middle
Oh,
of
my
the last
face.
century. Today, this toll road is still privately owned and operated by the Mount Washington
Why?
Summit Road Company.
I
And
think
with
this
very
is where
little
Nanny
change
would
in
start to
ownership,
lose
has
her
remained
shit.
a family business since
Start to lose
1906.
what?
As you continue
Oh,
your
oh,
ascent,
right, yeah,
glimpses of
yeah.
pristine mountain vistas begin
Boy,
to
we
reveal
just
Look at that
themselves.
edge.
But it wasn't
Jesus
always that
message.
way. In fact, around the turn of the century, logging barons had virtually clear-cut much of what is now the
Why?
White Mountain National
Why do my
Forest.
ears pop?
The decimation of these native
Because we're
forests
getting higher.
The
created
air
not
pressure
only fire and
change.
erosion dangers, but created such an unsightly mess that the cause of conservation was taken up by politicians, downstream mill owners, and average citizens alike. As a result, the Weeks Act of 1911
Does this happen when you
established
get
the White
higher up to a
Mountain
mountain?
National Forest,
No.
among many others. These mountains remain protected today and stand as a
probably from the,
reminder of the
like-
natural beauty of the wilderness. It's ironic, though, that it took the near destruction of everything that you see around you to motivate the effort to save it. Thankfully, what you see today is remarkably similar to what the first adventure seekers found in 1861. It was called the Mount Washington Carriage Road in those days, and there were as many as 25 mountain wagons and 120 horses in service each day of the season. These mountain wagons were specially designed and constructed for the carriage road by the Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire. This company manufactured
this
the
reminds me
famous
of?
Concord stagecoaches,
The road that
which
Sally
aside from
McQueen
being
rode
shipped worldwide
in
for
the
use in
Cars One
commerce
movie,
and
Oh, yeah.
when they first had to
transportation, were
drive.
used in practically every Western movie ever made. The carriage road mountain wagons were pulled by 6 horses and seated as many as 12 passengers. A typical trip took about 4 hours up, and though no one was in a rush in those days, passengers were at times asked to assist with one task. On windy days, those making the journey were asked to get out and collect rocks to add weight to the wagon so it wouldn't tip over in the strong winds above tree line. Though it is unmarked today, the halfway point along the road used to be a stopover for guests and horses in the old days. Here, the halfway house offered shelter and refreshments before the last long pull to the top. The ride down took 2 hours and was another adventure in itself. The steep grade and heavy loads meant that the stages wore through a set of leather brakes on every trip, as the horses, driver, and wagon fought gravity the whole way down. Also, the carriage road stages weren't alone on the road by any means. Individual hotels had their own coaches for their guests, while other folks drove the family buckboard or surrey, or rode on horseback. Then, as now, it was an active road that required the driver's full attention. As the word continued to spread, more and more people found their way to New Hampshire's North Country. New railroads continued to push their way past the lakes and into the hills. And while still a rural setting, the world had finally beaten a path to Mount Washington's doorstep.
Oh my.
As you gain elevation, you'll begin to notice startling changes in the vegetation. Nearer to the bottom of the auto road is a typical northeastern hardwood forest, composed of maple, oak, birch, and beech trees. Further on, you'll see fewer hardwoods and more evergreens, such as balsam fir and spruce. More significantly, these trees are diminishing greatly in size.
400
combination of
4,000 feet.
Scarcity of proper soil
Look at that edge.
create a difficult growing environment. Continuing upward, you are entering the crumholes, or the crooked wood zone. In some cases, these stunted and beautifully twisted and gnarled trees, with a height of only 2 or 3
Yeah, so
feet,
beautiful.
are more than 100 years old. These unique trees have adapted to
See the tree
survive
that's
in this
2,800
often inhospitable
years old?
location, as have a wide variety
It's like
of
a
wildlife
really
that
old tree.
calls
It's
this mountain
2,000.
range home.
Actually, no, I think it's
Moose,
4,800
black
years
bear,
old.
and deer are among the larger species to be found near the bottom, while bobcat,
Oh
beaver,
my,
porcupines,
no
raccoons,
way.
foxes, coyotes, and countless types of birds can be found on Mount Washington slopes. Even on the summit, mice, moles, shrews, and voles have adapted to life in this extreme environment. As your journey takes you further up the mountainside, you'll notice it has begun to get a bit cooler, and that the trees continue to get smaller. As the road goes on to its height of more than a mile in the sky, 6,288 feet to be exact, the climate changes with it, eventually reaching the equivalent temperature one might find 600 miles north of here in the Arctic tundra region. Just think about it. In the distance of just the first few miles upward, you've now traveled from the more familiar hardwood forest of our region through the crumholes to an area more like that in northern Labrador or Alaska. Here in the alpine zone of the Presidential Range, you'll find a stunning array of rare plant species, including alpine flowers, lichens, and mosses. In fact, plants like the dwarf
Austin, this guy
cinquefoil
just wants
live
to keep
only in the
going.
White Mountains and
wanna
nowhere
stop?
else on the planet, and are listed as federally protected species. Many of these unusual plants, though small, are very old, with some varieties not flowering until they
That's
are
not funny.
20 or more years old.
Whoa.
Many experts believe that the mountain landscape you're viewing is more than 10,000 years in the making. So again, we ask that when leaving your vehicle to explore the mountainside, to please be aware that the endless vistas are only one of the most obvious wonders here. There is also an amazing world right at your feet, which if not cared for, could be lost forever.
The sign
Never
was right
pick
though
or
about
step
having a
on
fear of
any
heights.
flower.
Oh yeah,
And when out
definitely.
of your vehicle above tree line, please step only on defined pathways. With your help, our fragile ecosystem will be something to marvel at for centuries to come.
When we come down, you're going to be on that side.
Scientific interest in Mount
What's up?
Washington has been
Outside.
ongoing for more than 200 years. In the last century, just the novelty of being here was enough to inspire whole books. One famous writer of the mid-1800s, Reverend Thomas Starr King, had this to say about the mountain's various climates.
I send you a greeting this morning from the cupola of New Hampshire. If perchance you are suffering from the heat when this missive reaches you, let your eyes cool themselves by reading that just outside the tip-top house, the mercury is at 34 degrees. The ride from the glen was very easy. We rose indeed by climate as well as ridges. It was July at the base, late September on the ledge, and November at the apex.
The tip-top house he refers to was built in 1853. You'll see it in just a bit. It's the only original summit building that survived the Great Fire of 1908. The summit today has evolved greatly from how it all began so long ago, but it's always been a hub of activity for travelers to the White Mountains.
5
The
miles.
summit community in the 1890s was a very busy place. It
I don't
featured
want
a
to be on
large
that
hotel,
side.
stage office, railroad station, and even its own newspaper called Among the Clouds, the first and only newspaper ever to be published on a mountaintop. All visitors to the peak had their names published in its pages, along with local news and gossip. The daily editions used to make their way down the mountain along the cog railway track on a contraption known as a slider,
Oh, my ears
or
popped
more
again.
popularly
So did
called
mine.
the Devil's Shingle. Real history was made again in 1899.
Every
when a
time my ears
little-known
pop, it
inventor,
feels like they're
Freeman O.
about to
Stanley,
bleed.
drove his
Really,
locomobile up the
they're not.
road. He did it for publicity, hoping to build a name for his fledgling company that he had just sold. Stanley began his expedition from Newton, Massachusetts.
Stanley?
The temperature was 32 at the bottom.
Mount Washington.
It's 25
The
now.
automotive age was dawning, and on August 31st, 1899, an unlikely little vehicle, looking like a horse-drawn buggy without the horse, became the first motor car to climb the mountain. As noted in Flora Stanley's account of the adventure, their journey received more laughter than laurels, as motor vehicles were still a virtually unknown sight to the general public. The amazed
never went up
responses of
this
the
high.
villagers along the way,
I
combined with
would
the
never.
success of the Mount Washington ascent, proved
for
the
Mount
value of this well-conceived publicity stunt. But few realized that Stanley's vehicle was the first of many that would follow, and that a new age of transportation had begun. Even F.E. Stanley himself, F.O. Stanley's twin brother and partner, wasn't sure of what the new invention would be capable of. As expressed in an
Look.
1897 letter to his wife, after one of their horseless carriages nearly caused an accident in town, he stated, "I wrote you
I
some
see the
time
base.
ago about motor carriages.
That's not funny.
Well, I'm building one. I'm making all the plans, and it will be
Are you
4
scared?
inches wider
Yes!
and 5 inches longer than our best buggy was.
Why?
It will cost me about $500. It will not be afraid of a steamroller and will
Because
have no bad habits.
My thing
It
about
will
my
stand
fear of
without hitching,
heights
and
is
perhaps that is all it will do.
if I
Well,
can't
as history has
see
shown us, it did
how
much
high it
more than
is,
simply
I'm fine.
stand still,
But then when I
as
look
did the Stanley
how
brothers,
high it
who went
is,
on to create the still famous
I can't
Stanley
do-
steamer, among many other
so
inventions.
I'm just gonna not look that way.
You will
Rocks is
soon
the
be
only thing
approaching the
protecting
summit.
us.
If
That's
it's
it.
a clear day, you're
Rocks?
enjoying
That's
some
it.
of the most
Crazy.
magnificent views to be
There are no
found anywhere in the
guardrails.
United States. If it's
No
not a
guardrails.
clear day, then you are truly learning what it means to be among the clouds. In either case, the
5,000
summit
feet.
community welcomes you. While you're here, visit the historic Tip Top House, which holds the record as the oldest summit building, standing since 1853. The Sherman Adams State Park building will
And
offer you a
survived the
top-of-the-world
fire?
perspective from the observation
What
deck,
fire of
with hot
1908?
meals and restrooms.
Fire up here.
Downstairs, explore the observatory's interactive Extreme
From a car?
Mount Washington Museum for a look at
No,
what life
I'm not
is like
sure.
at the summit in winter, as well as some rare mementos of the past. And be sure to visit the
You are
historic
on the
Summit
edge.
State
I know.
Office
When I say you're on the
in
edge, I mean
which
you're
is
on the
where
edge.
the
I know- I
observers
know.
huddled together while measuring a
I know
wind
where I
record
am.
wind speed in 1934. An unbelievable
Well, you're not on the edge.
31 miles
No,
per
you
hour.
are.
You won't have any trouble recognizing which building it is. It's the one
You
that's
don't
chained
want to
the
come up
ground.
here with a nervous
If your
driver.
headlights are on, be sure to turn
That's
them on
novice.
before exploring the
Nervous.
Oh, and you
You
mean
should be
nervous.
coming to the parking area
You also
pretty
don't
soon.
wanna come up here
So
with a
save the
novice
rest of
driver.
this tour for
I
when
know.
you begin the trip back down.
Ooh.
Enjoy your adventure
Ooh.
at the top of New England.
We got a big truck and us and a narrow road. There we go.
Now that you've had the opportunity to experience the world above treeline firsthand, prepare yourself for a whole new series of scenic vistas on the way down.
24.
Scenic?
Yes, you'll see the Great Gulf Wilderness, a glacial
So
cirque
scenic.
of more than 5,500
Scenic.
acres that was officially designated
notice
the
how,
wilderness area in 1964.
there's no trees
This
now this
wilderness
far up?
classification is especially important as it
Because it's
protects
too
this
far up.
vast area from any form of man's intrusions. No timber harvesting, mining,
Can you
or
please
buildings
go
of any
lane
kind
that's
are
not
allowed.
close to the
And
edge?
with the exception of a few hiking trails, only the forces of
lane
nature
thing
are at
isn't-
work in the Great Gulf Wilderness. But
No.
before we continue our story, let us briefly emphasize these important driving tips. For the trip
trying to
down,
make me
the
nervous?
two most important facts to remember are these. First, use low gear the whole way down. This will allow the transmission and engine to act as a brake and help maintain a slow speed. Remember, low gear is
Oh, I hate
usually
turning.
indicated by a 1
I hate
or an
turning.
L, or L1 on your shifter, or a B if you're driving a hybrid or electric car. Second,
Just think of
don't
it as
ride your
a
brakes. pump
really
action
long
of the
drive
foot
up
pedal
Signal
allows
Hill.
the brakes to run cooler than does a steady pressure, and never
That
use
doesn't
water
help.
to cool your brakes. If they begin to fade, stop at the next pullout and allow them to cool while you enjoy the view. If you're in the fog, please turn on your headlights, and remember that cars heading down should yield the right of way to cars on their way up. While you were on the summit, you might have seen some hikers. Most are day hikers, either out to conquer the highest peak, or traversing the Presidential Range via the miles of trails that crisscross these slopes. Many hikers begin from the Appalachian Mountain Club's headquarters, just south of our base area in Pinkham Notch. From there, visitors get an amazing view into Tuckerman Ravine, world famous for its challenging spring skiing. Its legendary headwall and gullies are arguably
Ooh,
the
Jake,
birthplace
temperature
of
drop
green
big time.
backcountry
Is
skiing.
getting pins and
Dating
needles
back to
something
the
normal when you're
1930s.
going up?
Some of the hikers you
No.
encountered may be traversing the Appalachian Trail.
My hand
This
just got
famous
pins and
footpath
needles for like
stretches
3
more than
milliseconds.
2,100 miles from Georgia to Maine and crosses the auto road on its way. Even for these folks, reaching the
This
summit of Mount
is not
Washington is a
cool,
major milestone
okay?
on their journey.
No?
Okay,
The
no,
native
it's
Indian
cool.
populations of
Going
the
up
area,
here,
the
but the
Abenaki tribe, among
narrowness
others,
is not cool.
considered
Oh, I know.
Agio
Oh,
Pocho, as
Lord.
they referred to Mount Washington, a sacred place where the Great Spirit lived. So,
You
legend
should be
has it
glad
that
you're
they
not
never
on this
climbed
side.
the mountain. Prior to the arrival of European ships and settlers,
Let me
this region was home to a
remind
great number of Native
Remind you of something.
But times have begun to change.
If the car is gonna
Sparsely
go over the
populated
cliff,
coastal
Yeah.
communities
both
and
sides are
homes
going,
continued
not
to
just
move
the
in.
side on the
One of those early
on the
settlers
cliff.
was
I
named
realize.
Darby Field.
7
Hey,
miles.
In
only a mile to
1642,
go.
After seeing the shining summit from a ship,
I
off
get
the
that
coast
both of us
Maine,
would go
he set out
down,
in
but,
search of his
like-
fortune,
Yeah, let's not
enlisting
talk
two
about that.
Native American guides to accompany him into the wilds
That's
of
not
this
cool.
unknown land. Darby set out by birch bark
I can't even
canoe
look
near
down, but I
Exeter,
keep
New
doing it.
Hampshire.
I know.
paddled
I keep
up the
looking down,
coast
but I don't
into
wanna
the
look
Saco
down.
River and up to what is now Glen, New
You see what I'm
Hampshire.
saying?
After obtaining permission from the local tribal elders, Darby Field and his two companions set out on
Nanny,
what
you
became
should be
the
glad
first ever
you're not-
ascent of this
you're not-
She'd
formidable
never
mountain,
make it.
At least the first ever by a European. Whether he sought
We would need a
riches, glory,
tranquilizer.
adventure,
Yes,
or
you
a
would,
combination
actually.
of all three, Darby and his guides achieved their quest and their place in history more than 350 years ago. However,
have to
after that
tranquilize
epic
me.
adventure, the mountain
I wish we had a
rolled over and
gun.
went back to
Let's go
sleep
back to
for
that
another
gun shop,
150
see if there's any
years.
tranquilizers.
It wasn't until the 1790s that the Crawford family, Abel, and then Ethan after him, finally began
Us,
housing
we'll
guests
just say,
and
we're using
guiding
this
them
for some
around Mount
hunting,
Washington.
and then, like,
the
no,
family
not.
built Crawford's Inn on the southern end of
shoot
the
Nanny?
Presidential Range.
No.
In the area now known as
Oh,
Crawford
tranquilizer.
Mountain. In
Yes.
1818,
You want
the
to shoot
inn
her?
hosted a group of visitors
I was like,
who arrived with the
oh, we would like to buy this
express
trank
purpose of
gun.
climbing Mount
We're
Washington,
hunting some
and did
animals,
so
but we're
with
not
the help
actually
of
going to
Ethan
kill them.
Crawford.
We're just going to
Ethan's
trank them, and
subsequent
then
journal
we'll be
entry reflects the
like, okay.
typical Yankee
We take it,
flair
and we're like,
for understanding
Nanny,
of their
I know
massive
you hate this,
20th century
so
road.
you won't
My
remember
father
any
and
of
I
it.
made a footpath from the
Actually,
notch
when you
out
trank,
through
you
the
still
woods,
remember.
and it
You
was
need, like, a
advertised in
machine
the
that makes it
newspapers.
so
We
you
soon
can't
began to
remember.
have a few visitors.
It'll just feel like a dream.
And nearly 2 centuries
Ah,
later,
which
they've never
tranking
stopped
can
coming.
do.
If for nothing else, the Crawford family legacy is assured by the fact that they
I
cut
wouldn't be
the
able to
first
walk
hiking
that far
trail
on the
up the
edge.
mountain in
See, those people
1819,
are walking on
which
the
is
white
still
line.
in use today and is the oldest hiking
Okay,
trail
now
in America.
now you get to feel my
Beyond
pain.
that, the Crawfords cut the mountain's
You're right
first
on that
bridle
edge.
path,
Oh
which
my.
incidentally later became the principal route of the Cog Railway. The
Does this
history of
mean we're up?
transportation
We're
has
up here?
etched itself
Almost.
onto the slopes of this legendary mountain. Take a moment to think again of the horse teams straining against their harnesses as the drivers spoke
My
commands
ears
and
have popped
encouragement.
about 3 times
Horses
now.
ruled this road for the first 50 years,
They
with
just
the
popped
carriages
again.
and stagecoaches of that era being continuously developed and improved to cope with the harsh conditions of mountain travel. While the first motor vehicle ascended the road in 1899, it wasn't until 1912 that the first gas-powered vehicles took over the job of carrying guests up the road. From that point on, the horse-drawn era began to fade from memory, and the carriage road eventually became the auto road. At the time, however, many traditional thinkers were not ready to acknowledge the worth of these
Right
mechanical
there.
contraptions. During this era of change, a statewide newspaper, the Manchester Union Leader, wrote, "The whole thing is an unmitigated nuisance. The lives and property
Yes,
of
it
perfectly
is.
helpless people have been menaced for no reason other than to provide amusement for total strangers. Some drivers can be trusted, most cannot. If these people think of coming up another year,
We can
let
be
them
trusted.
stay in jail a couple of days, and everyone will be the better for it." The first motor vehicle that was used to carry passengers, a used Thomas Flyer, began